She grew up in a quiet working-class neighborhood where life moved slowly, and people rarely expected surprises from one another from an early age. She learned how to blend into the background and not draw attention to herself. Her parents worked long hours and valued stability over dreams, so creativity was seen as a hobby rather than a future. She did well in school, stayed polite, and followed rules, yet inside she carried a deep emotional world that few people noticed. Music entered her life by chance when an old upright piano was left behind by a relative who moved away. It stood in the corner of the living room, slightly out of tune with chipped wood and worn keys. At first it was just furniture, something that gathered dust and held old family photos. One evening, she pressed a key out of curiosity and felt something shift inside her chest. The sound was imperfect, but it stayed with her long after the note faded. She began returning to the piano late at night after homework was finished. House was quiet. She had no teacher, no formal lessons, and no guidance beyond a few borrowed books and videos. Her fingers moved awkwardly at first, and mistakes were frequent. Still, she felt calm when she played, as if the piano listened without judgment. Music became her private language, a place where she could speak honestly without explaining herself. As the years passed, she grew more attached to the instrument, even though no one else paid much attention. Family gatherings were noisy and full of conversations, so her playing was usually ignored or cut short. Friends talked about sports, parties, and plans, while she preferred staying home practicing simple melodies. She never complained and never asked for praise. She believed that if something mattered, it did not need to be announced. In school, she was known as reliable but unremarkable. Teachers saw her as disciplined and quiet, not as someone with unusual ability. When talent shows or music events were announced, she never signed up. The idea of performing felt uncomfortable and unnecessary. Music was personal and exposing. It felt like opening a door she was not ready to open. Still, she practiced every day, improving slowly, without realizing how much progress she was making. Her sense of timing, touch, and emotion grew stronger through repetition. She listened closely to how each sound felt rather than how it looked on a page. She learned to express sadness, hope, and determination through her hands. What she played was simple, but it carried honesty and depth. As adulthood approached, expectations grew heavier. She was encouraged to choose a practical career and build a stable future. Music was described as something to enjoy in spare moments, not something to take seriously. She nodded and agreed because disagreement required energy she did not have. Yet she never stopped playing. She worked during the day and practiced at night, often tired, but focused. The piano became a constant presence, a steady companion in a life full of uncertainty. She never imagined that anyone outside her small circle would hear her play. Fame, recognition, and applause felt distant and unrealistic. Then an unexpected opportunity appeared through a local community event. A cultural evening was being organized to showcase ordinary people and their everyday skills. Someone who had heard her practicing suggested her name without much explanation. The organizers did not expect much and described the slot as a filler between larger performances. When she was contacted, she hesitated, but eventually agreed. She was told to keep it simple and play something short and familiar. The request felt safe and non-threatening. No one expected a standout moment, and neither did she. As the day approached, she felt a quiet tension building inside her. She was not nervous about mistakes, but about being seen. Standing in front of others meant sharing a part of herself she had always protected. Still, she prepared carefully, choosing a simple tune she had played many times before. On the day of the event, the room felt larger than she expected. The piano on stage was newer and brighter than the one she knew at home. The audience chatted casually, unaware that anything meaningful was about to happen. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. At that moment, memories of long, quiet nights and solitary practice filled her mind. She remembered playing without an audience, without pressure, and without fear. She took a breath and reminded herself that she was only asked to play a simple tune. Nothing was expected and nothing more was required. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, she began playing exactly as she had planned, starting with the simple tune that had been requested. The melody was familiar, gentle, and steady, and it flowed easily from her hands. At first, the audience barely noticed as conversations continued, and a few people glanced at their phones. She did not mind because she was used to being unheard. As she played, she focused on keeping her breathing calm and her movements relaxed. The piano felt different under her fingers, smoother and more responsive than the one at home. Each note carried farther, filling the room in a way she had never experienced before. Slowly, the noise in the room softened, and a few heads began to turn. She stayed with the simple tune for longer than expected, allowing it to settle. Her confidence grew with each measure, and her posture changed without her realizing. The music no longer felt like something she was performing, it felt like something she was remembering without planning to. She began adding small changes, a softer touch here, a stronger emphasis there. Nothing dramatic, just subtle shifts guided by instinct. The tune started to sound fuller, richer, and more alive. A hush spread across the room as more people began listening. Chairs stopped moving, and voices faded into silence. The organizers exchanged looks, surprised by the sudden change in atmosphere. She sensed the attention, but did not look up. Her emotions began to rise, carried by years of quiet effort and unspoken feeling. The music became a place where everything she had held back could finally exist. She leaned into the keys, allowing herself to feel fully present. The simple tune began transforming into something deeper. She was no longer following the original structure exactly. Her hands moved with confidence, shaped by years of private practice. The melody grew bolder, and the rhythm more intense. The sound filled the room with warmth and strength. People in the audience felt the shift even if they could not explain it. Some leaned forward, others held their breath. The music carried emotion that felt honest, And raw, it did not ask for attention, it earned it. She closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, but to focus. In that moment she forgot where she was. There was no stage, no audience, no expectations. There was only music. And the feeling it carried, her playing, grew more powerful without becoming rushed. Each note landed with purpose. The piano responded with clarity and depth. The sound echoed through the space, leaving no room for distraction. She thought of the nights she played alone after long days, the moments when music was the only thing that understood her. Those memories shaped the intensity of her performance. What she played was not rehearsed, but it was true. The audience now watched in complete silence. Some felt a tightening in their chest, others felt unexpected tears. They had come for an ordinary event and found themselves witnessing something rare, a transformation unfolding in real time. The organizers realized that this was no longer a filler performance. It was the heart of the evening. They stood still, afraid that any movement might break the moment. The room felt charged and alive. Her fingers moved faster, then slower, guided by emotion rather than thought. The music rose and fell, creating tension and release. It told a story without words, a story of patience, struggle, and quiet strength. She was aware of nothing except the sound she was creating. Fear, doubt, and self-consciousness faded away for the first time. She allowed hers take up space. The piano became an extension of her voice. As the final notes approached, she softened her touch. The intensity eased into something gentle and reflective. She returned briefly to the original simple tune, now transformed by everything that had come before. When the last note faded, she held her hands still. The silence that followed was deep and full. No one moved or spoke. The moment lingered, as if the room needed time to breathe. She opened her eyes slowly and looked up. The faces before her were different from when she began. They were focused, emotional, and deeply present. She felt exposed, but also strangely calm. For a second she wondered if she had done too much, if she had broken an unspoken rule by giving more than asked. But before doubt could take hold, the room erupted. Applause filled the space, loud and unrestrained. People stood, some without realizing they were doing so. The sound of clapping surrounded her from every direction. She felt overwhelmed, unsure how to respond. Her heart raced and her hands trembled. She stood slowly, offering a small nod. The applause continued, stronger than before. In that moment she understood that something had changed, not just for the audience, but for herself. She had been told to play a simple tune. What she gave was everything she was, and the room had felt it. After the applause finally settled, she stepped away from the piano, feeling unsure of where to place herself. People were still looking at her with expressions she was not used to seeing. There was admiration, curiosity, something like respect. She kept her gaze low and walked to the side of the room, trying to regain her balance. Several people approached her almost immediately. They spoke quickly and with excitement, telling her how deeply the music had affected them. Some said they felt chills, others said they were reminded of moments from their own lives. She listened, politely nodding and thanking them, though she struggled to process their words. An older woman held her hands and said the performance felt honest and brave. A young man said he had never listened to piano music before, but now wanted to learn. These reactions surprised her, because she had not intended to move anyone. She had only intended to play. The organizers gathered nearby, discussing what had just happened. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing at her as if she might disappear. One of them approached and asked where she had trained. When she said she had taught herself, he looked stunned. She felt uncomfortable with the attention and gently tried to step away. Crowds made her uneasy, and praise felt unfamiliar. Still, she sensed that this moment mattered. Something about the air in the room felt different from before. Later that evening, she returned home carrying a quiet weight inside her. The house was still and familiar, and the piano waited in its usual place. She sat down and played a few soft notes, trying to reconnect with herself. The sound grounded her, reminding her that this was where it all began. She replayed the performance in her mind, not to judge it, but to understand it. She wondered how something so private had become so public so quickly. For years music had been her refuge. Now it had stepped into the open without asking permission. In the days that followed, messages began to arrive. Some were from people who had attended the event. Others came from friends of friends who had heard about her performance. They asked questions, offered encouragement, and shared recordings taken on phones. She watched one of the recordings late at night. The image was shaky, and the sound imperfect. Still, she recognized the emotion in her posture and movements. She saw someone she barely knew at work. People mentioned the performance in passing. Some congratulated her. Others asked why she had never talked about her music. She smiled politely, unsure how to explain that it had never seemed important to say. Music had always been something she did, not something she claimed. A local music teacher reached out. After seeing the video, he suggested she consider formal training and public performances. The idea felt overwhelming and unrealistic. She thanked him, but did not commit to anything. She struggled internally during this time. Part of her wanted to retreat and return to quiet nights alone with the piano. Another part felt curious about what might happen if she did not hide. She felt caught between comfort and possibility. One evening she sat with her parents and told them about the event. They listened with surprise and pride. They admitted they had not realized how serious her music was. The conversation was awkward but meaningful. Her parents encouraged her gently without pushing. They said they only wanted her to feel fulfilled. Hearing this lifted a weight she had not known she was carrying. She felt seen in a new way. She began practicing with renewed intention, not for perfection, but for expression. She explored new pieces and experimented with dynamics and tempo. Music felt alive and expansive. She also noticed a shift in how she carried herself. She walked with a little more confidence. She spoke more clearly and made decisions with less hesitation. The performance had unlocked something deeper than talent. Still, doubts returned often. She questioned whether that night had been a rare moment, unlikely to repeat. She feared expectations that she might not be able to meet. These thoughts kept her awake some nights. One afternoon, she received an invitation to perform at another small event. The message was respectful and gave her complete freedom over what to play. She read it several times before responding. Her hands shook as she typed her reply. She agreed. The decision brought both excitement and fear. She knew she could no longer pretend that music was only a private comfort. Others had heard her voice and wanted to hear it again. That knowledge felt heavy, but also meaningful. She returned to the piano that night not to rehearse a specific piece. Instead, she played freely, allowing emotion to guide her. She thought about the audience from the first performance. She thought about herself. The music that emerged felt honest and strong. It reminded her why she had started playing all those years ago, not for recognition, but for connection with herself and now with others. As she finished playing, she sat in silence. She realized that the simple tune she had been asked to play had changed everything. It had opened a door she could not close. And for the first time, she did not want to. She did not know where this path would lead. She only knew that she could no longer ignore what music meant to her. The quiet girl who blended into the background was still there, but she was no longer hidden. The world had heard her, and she was beginning to hear herself too. The days leading up to the next performance moved slowly and quickly at the same time. She felt a constant mix of anticipation and uncertainty that followed her everywhere. Unlike the first event, this time people were coming specifically to hear her play. That thought alone made her chest feel tight. She practiced daily, but with a different mindset than before. Instead of repeating pieces endlessly, she focused on understanding what she wanted to express. She paid attention to how different emotions changed her touch on the keys. Some days, the music felt heavy and reflective. Other days, it felt bright and urgent. She reminded herself that she was not trying to impress. She was simply sharing something real. Still, the idea of expectations lingered in her thoughts. She wondered if people wanted another surprise or something even bigger. The venue for the second performance was smaller, but more focused. Chairs were arranged neatly facing the piano. The room felt intentional, as if listening was the main purpose. When she arrived early to rehearse, she felt the quiet intensity of the space. A few people recognized her and smiled warmly. Their support felt genuine rather than overwhelming. She took comfort in that. It reminded her that connection mattered more than attention. Before the performance, she sat alone with the piano. She rested her hands on the keys without playing. She breathed slowly, grounding herself in the moment. She thought about the girl she used to be playing alone at night. When it was time to begin, she walked onto the small stage. The room was silent and expectant. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and looked at the piano. This time she did not wait for permission. She started with a piece she had written herself. It was simple in structure, but rich in feeling. The melody unfolded gently, inviting the audience into her world. She felt present, steady, and open. As she played, she noticed subtle reactions, people leaning forward, eyes closing, breath slowing. The room felt connected through sound. She felt less like a performer and more like a guide. Her confidence grew. As the piece progressed, she allowed the music to expand and contract naturally. There was no rush and no fear of mistakes. Each moment felt intentional. Halfway through, she realized something important. She was no longer playing to be accepted. She was playing because she had something to say. That realization brought a deep sense of calm. The music grew stronger, reflecting resilience and quiet determination. Her hands moved with ease, shaped by years of private dedication. She trusted herself fully in that moment. The piano responded with warmth and clarity. When she finished, the room remained silent for a breath. Then applause followed, sincere and steady. She stood slowly, feeling grounded rather than shaken. The reaction felt affirming without being overwhelming. Afterward, people approached her with thoughtful comments. They spoke about how the music made them feel present and reflective. No one asked for spectacle. They appreciated honesty. A local journalist attended the event and requested a short conversation. She hesitated, but agreed. The questions were gentle, focusing on her journey rather than her sudden attention. She spoke honestly, admitting she was still learning what this all meant. The article appeared a few days later. It described her as someone who had spent years listening before being heard. Friends shared it with pride. Strangers sent messages expressing gratitude. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, not pressure but awareness. She understood that her music now reached beyond herself. That realization made her more intentional. She continued working her regular job, but felt a shift in how she approached it. She no longer saw it as the only path forward. Music had become part of her identity, not just an escape. Balancing both required patience and honesty. She began setting aside time not just to practice, but to reflect. She wrote down thoughts, feelings, and musical ideas. These notes guided her playing more than technical exercises ever had. They kept her grounded. There were moments of doubt. She worried about sustainability and the future. She questioned whether this attention would fade as quickly as it arrived. But she learned not to chase certainty. Instead, she focused on consistency, showing up at the piano each day with intention, listening closely to what the music wanted to become, trusting that growth did not need to be loud. Another invitation arrived, this time from a small regional festival. The scale was larger and the audience unfamiliar. She took time to consider it carefully. After reflection, she accepted. She knew this would push her further out of her comfort zone, but she also knew that growth lived there. She prepared not by over-rehearsing, but by reconnecting with why she played. On the night before the festival, she sat at her piano in the quiet house. She played softly, letting the sound fill the room. She felt gratitude for the journey so far, from a simple tune to something far deeper. She realized that the fire people heard was not sudden. It had been building slowly for years, fueled by patience, solitude, and persistence. Now it was visible as she closed the piano lid. She felt a steady confidence, not certainty about the future, but trust in herself. Whatever came next, she knew she would meet it honestly. The regional festival, arrived with more noise and movement than anything she had experienced before. People filled the space carrying programs and conversations echoed from every direction. The stage looked larger, the lights brighter, and the piano more imposing. For a moment she felt very small. She reminded herself to breathe and focus on what she could control. She arrived early, walked the stage, and touched the keys gently. The piano felt unfamiliar, but responsive. She spent a few minutes playing soft scales, letting her hands adjust backstage. She listened to other performers. Some were confident and expressive, others clearly nervous. She noticed that everyone carried their own quiet fears. That realization helped her feel less alone. When her name was announced, she felt a wave of warmth rush through her body. She walked onto the stage with steady steps. The audience quieted gradually as she took her seat. She rested her hands on her lap for a moment. She chose not to start with a simple tune this time. Instead, she began with a slow, reflective piece she had shaped over weeks. The opening notes were soft, but intentional. The sound traveled clearly through the open space. As she played, she felt the audience scattered energy of the festival began to focus. People leaned into the music, allowing it to guide their attention. She felt connected rather than exposed. The piece unfolded gradually, building layers of emotion. She allowed silence between phrases, letting the sound breathe. Her movements were calm and assured. She trusted the music to speak. Halfway through the piece, she felt something shift again, not surprise, but recognition. She understood that this stage did not change who she was, it only amplified what already existed. Her playing grew stronger, carrying warmth and quiet intensity. She thought of the years she had spent unnoticed, the long nights of practice, the doubt and patience, all of it lived in her hands. The audience responded with deep stillness. That silence felt more powerful than applause. She sensed their presence fully. It gave her strength. When the final note faded, she held her posture steady. She did not rush to stand. She allowed the moment to complete itself. Then applause rose, filling the space. The reaction was strong and sustained. People stood, some clapped above their heads. She bowed. Once feeling grounded, the noise washed over her without overwhelming her. After leaving the stage, she felt a calm clarity. There was no rush of adrenaline, only quiet satisfaction. She had played honestly, and that was enough. Everything else felt secondary. Later that evening, several musicians approached her. They spoke with respect and curiosity. Some asked about her background, others about her approach. She answered openly without exaggeration. One conversation stood out. A seasoned pianist told her that her playing felt mature and sincere. He said those qualities could not be taught quickly. The words stayed with her. The festival ended, but its impact continued. Videos from her performance began circulating online. Comments appeared from people she had never met. They described feeling moved, grounded, and inspired. She watched one video alone at home. The sound quality was imperfect, but the emotion was clear. She did not feel embarrassed or critical. She felt accepting. Opportunities began appearing more frequently. Invitations to small concerts, collaborations, and workshops. Each one required consideration. She learned to say no when something did not align. This was new territory. She had never thought about boundaries in relation to music. Now she understood their importance. Protecting her energy helped her stay honest. Her daily life continued with adjustments. She reduced her work hours slightly to make room for music. The decision felt risky but necessary. She trusted herself to adapt. Financial uncertainty caused moments of worry. She addressed them practically without panic. She planned carefully, saved when possible, and asked for advice. She learned that responsibility and creativity could coexist. She also made time for rest, long walks, quiet mornings and evenings. Without practice, she knew that silence fed the music. Balance mattered. Her relationship with her parents evolved. They attended a small performance and watched her play with pride. Afterward, they spoke openly about their earlier doubts. The conversation brought understanding rather than resentment. She noticed changes within herself. She spoke with more confidence. She trusted her instincts. She allowed herself to be seen without shrinking. Still, she remained grounded. She remembered the girl who practiced alone without recognition. That memory kept her humble and focused. It reminded her why she played. Another major opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A respected music organization invited her to audition for a special program. The offer was intimidating and exciting. She took time before responding. She reflected deeply on what she wanted, not fame, not validation, but growth, connection, and integrity. She decided to accept the audition. Preparing for it required discipline. She practiced with focus, but without obsession. She chose pieces that felt true to her voice. She avoided chasing complexity for its own sake. On the morning of the audition, she felt nervous but steady. She reminded herself that this was an invitation, not a test, an opportunity to share, not to prove. That mindset grounded her. As she entered the audition room, she felt the same calm she felt at the piano at home. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The fire in her music was no longer accidental. It was intentional, controlled, and deeply rooted. Years of quiet preparation had shaped it. Now it burned steadily. Whatever the outcome, she knew one thing clearly: she was no longer hiding. She was living honestly through sound, and that changed everything. The days after the audition felt unusually quiet. She returned to her routines, unsure of what to expect and careful not to imagine outcomes. She reminded herself that she had already gained something valuable by stepping forward. The act of showing up had strengthened her in ways she could feel. Weeks passed without news, and she focused on what she could control. She practiced daily, but without urgency. Her playing felt deeper, more settled. She noticed that her relationship with the piano had matured. Music no longer felt like something she escaped into. It felt like a conversation she was continuing. She explored new sounds and ideas, letting curiosity lead. There was joy in the process. Rather than pressure when the message finally arrived, she read it slowly. She had been accepted into the program. The words felt unreal at first. Then quietly powerful, she sat still, letting the meaning sink in. The program required travel time, commitment, and vulnerability. It meant learning alongside others with strong backgrounds and formal training. The idea intimidated her, but also excited her. She decided to trust the feeling that had guided her so far. The first gathering brought her into a room filled with talented musicians. Some spoke confidently about their achievements, others listened closely, sharing thoughtfully. She felt like an outsider for a moment. As sessions began, she realized that her path, though different, was respected. Her self-taught background brought a unique perspective. Instructors listened carefully when she played. They asked questions rather than giving commands. She learned new techniques, but more importantly, new ways of listening. She understood that growth was not about replacing who she was, it was about expanding it. That realization eased her fear. There were challenging moments, feedback sometimes touched sensitive places. She felt exposed and uncertain. But she stayed present and open. She practiced late into the evenings, refining pieces and ideas. Fatigue came, but so did clarity. She learned how discipline could support creativity rather than limit it. Her confidence grew slowly, but steadily. Connections formed with other participants. They shared stories, struggles, and encouragement. She realized that many of them carried doubts despite their experience. That common ground built trust. One mentor noticed her tendency to hold back emotionally in certain passages. He encouraged her to lean fully into expression. The advice resonated deeply. She began allowing herself more freedom during a group performance. She played a piece that felt especially personal. She felt nervous, but committed as she played. She sensed the room respond. The connection felt immediate and genuine. Afterward, several peers approached her quietly. They spoke about how the music felt honest and grounded. She accepted the feedback without deflecting. She was learning how to receive as well as give. Outside the program, her life continued to adjust. She balanced responsibilities carefully. Some days felt overwhelming. She learned to ask for help when needed. Her parents supported her in practical ways. Their belief grew as they saw her dedication. That support meant more than words. It gave her stability. She also faced moments of loneliness. Travel and focus left little time for old routines. She missed the comfort of anonymity at times, but she knew she was moving forward. A public performance was scheduled. As part of the program, the audience would include professionals and strangers. She felt the familiar tension return, but she also felt prepared. In the days leading up to it, she reflected on her journey from a quiet room and a worn piano to stages and shared spaces. The contrast felt immense. She chose to perform a piece that blended simplicity and intensity. It reflected her beginnings and her growth. She practiced until it felt natural, not perfect, but true. On the night of the performance, she stepped onto the stage calmly. The lights were bright, but not blinding. The piano waited, familiar and steady. She took her seat with intention. She began playing and felt present immediately. The music flowed without resistance. Her hands moved with assurance. Her emotions guided rather than overwhelmed her. The audience listened closely. She sensed their attention fully. It gave her energy without pressure. She felt aligned. As the final notes faded, she remained still. The silence felt respectful and full. Then applause followed, warm and sustained. She stood and bowed with ease. That night, she returned to her room feeling fulfilled, not because of approval, but because of alignment. She had honored her voice that mattered most. She realized that success no longer meant surprise or recognition. It meant honesty, consistency, and growth. The blazing moment that once stunned others had become a steady flame within her. She was no longer defined by being overlooked nor by being discovered. She was defined by how she chose to show up day after day. Music had led her here quietly, patiently. She followed it without knowing the destination. Now she understood that the journey itself was the gift, and she was ready for whatever came next. As the program progressed, she began to feel a deeper sense of belonging. She no longer saw herself as someone who had slipped into the music world by accident. She understood that her place had been earned through years of quiet commitment. Opportunities continued to appear, but she approached them with discernment. She chose projects that aligned with her values rather than chasing visibility. This clarity brought peace. She no longer felt pulled in too many directions. One meaningful opportunity involved collaborating with other musicians to create an original performance. The process required listening, compromise, and trust. She contributed thoughtfully, allowing space for others while honoring her own voice. The collaboration taught her new forms of expression. Rehearsals were intense, but rewarding. Ideas evolved through discussion, experimentation, and patience. She discovered joy in shared creation. Music felt like a living conversation. The final performance of the collaboration drew a diverse audience. The response was deeply positive. People spoke about the sense of unity and emotion they felt. She felt proud of what they had built together. Around this time, she was invited to speak at a small community event. The audience included young people who felt unsure about their creative paths. She hesitated at first, but agreed she wanted to speak honestly without pretending to have all the answers. During her talk, she shared her journey openly. She spoke about doubt, solitude, and persistence. She explained that growth often happens quietly before it becomes visible. Her words resonated strongly. Several attendees approached her afterward expressing gratitude. They said her story made them feel less alone. Those conversations stayed with her. They reminded her that impact could extend beyond performance. Her relationship with music continued to deepen. She experimented with composing pieces that reflected personal memories. These works felt vulnerable but grounding. She learned to trust that honesty would find its audience. She also faced moments of fatigue. Balancing creativity, responsibility, and visibility required energy. She listened carefully to her limits. Rest became part of her discipline. There were days When she chose silence over sound, walks, reading, and reflection nourished her creativity. She learned that stepping back did not mean losing momentum, it meant sustaining it. A turning point came when she was offered a chance to record her music professionally. The idea felt both exciting and daunting. Recording meant permanence, it meant capturing moments that could not be revised. She took time to consider what she wanted to preserve. She chose pieces that represented different stages of her journey, from simplicity to intensity, from solitude to connection. The recording sessions were intimate and focused. She worked closely with engineers who respected her vision. They listened carefully and adjusted thoughtfully. The environment felt supportive. Hearing her music played back was a powerful experience. She noticed details she had never heard before. She also recognized her own growth. The sound carried confidence and warmth. As the recording progressed, she felt a sense of completion, not an ending, but a milestone, a recognition of how far she had come, from playing unnoticed to being heard clearly. When the recordings were released, the response was quiet but sincere. Listeners wrote messages, describing how the music accompanied their own moments. Some listened while working, others while reflecting. She felt honored by their trust. She did not measure success by numbers, she measured it by connection, by knowing that her music lived alongside others' lives that felt meaningful. Her identity continued to shift. She no longer introduced herself cautiously. She spoke of music as a central part of her life with humility. But without apology, the simple tune that once opened a door remained part of her repertoire. She revisited it often. Each time it sounded different, shaped by experience. It reminded her of where everything began. She performed it at times with full intensity, at other times with gentle restraint. The tune had grown with her. It carried memory and possibility. Looking back, she recognized that the moment she stunned others was only a beginning. The true transformation happened afterward, in the choices she made, in the way she learned to trust herself. She understood now that a blazing masterpiece is not a single performance. It is a way of showing up fully and honestly over time. It is built through patience, courage, and care. As she prepared for future projects, she felt grounded, not driven by fear or urgency, but guided by purpose. She knew who she was. The quiet girl had become a confident artist, not because she sought attention, but because she honored her inner voice and allowed it to be heard. She reached a point where the noise around her no longer defined her direction. The attention, praise, and opportunities became part of the background rather than the goal. What mattered most was the quiet understanding she had built with herself. She continued to live simply despite the changes in her life. Mornings began with reflection and evenings often ended at the piano. The routine kept her grounded and present. Music remained a practice, not a performance. When people asked about the moment that changed everything, she spoke honestly. She said it was never about stunning anyone, it was about allowing herself to be fully present. That truth surprised many, but it felt right to her. She returned often to her hometown, not for recognition, but for remembrance. The old piano still stood in the corner. Its worn keys carried the weight of her beginnings. She played there alone. Sometimes the sound was imperfect, but familiar. It reminded her of patience, solitude, and trust. Those qualities had shaped her more than applause ever could. She stayed connected to the community that first heard her. She attended small events, quietly supporting others. She listened more than she spoke. That balance kept her humble. Young musicians reached out asking for advice. She never gave instructions as rules. She shared stories. Instead, she told them that growth is slow and often invisible. She emphasized the value of consistency, of showing up even when no one is watching, of listening deeply to one's own voice. Her words came from experience, not theory. Her music continued to evolve. It became more spacious and intentional. She allowed silence to exist within sound. She understood that restraint could be powerful. Performances felt different now. They were less about proving something, more about offering something. She felt connected to audiences without needing validation. She accepted that not every performance would be transformative. Some nights were quieter and simpler. She honored those moments as well. They were part of the journey. The simple tune remained a symbol. It reminded her that beginnings do not need to be impressive, they need to be honest. Everything else can grow from there. When she played it now, audiences listened with reverence, not because of its complexity, but because of the story it carried. They felt the years within it. She no longer felt pressure to exceed herself. She trusted the process of steady growth. The fire within her burned calmly and consistently. It did not need to blaze constantly. Her life felt aligned. Work, relationships, and creativity supported one another. She made choices based on values rather than fear. That alignment brought peace. She understood that recognition comes and goes. What remains is integrity. She protected that carefully. It guided her decisions. There were moments when she still felt doubt. She welcomed them as reminders to stay curious. Doubt no longer paralyzed her. It informed her gently. As time passed, her story spread quietly, not through headlines, but through word of mouth. People shared how her music accompanied their lives. That impact felt lasting. She reflected often on the night she was told to play a simple tune. She smiled at the memory, not because of the reaction, but because she had listened to herself. That choice had opened everything, not suddenly but steadily. It had led her to a life of meaning, a life shaped by sound and intention. She no longer measured success by milestones. She measured it by presence, by how fully she showed up in each moment. That was enough. The blazing masterpiece people spoke about was never just the music, it was the courage to stop hiding, the willingness to be seen, the patience to grow slowly. She carried that understanding forward into every note, every choice. Every day her journey continued without urgency, truth. And when she sat at the piano, now hands resting on the keys, she felt gratitude for the quiet beginning and the steady becoming.